Everybody. There's just so much to do when you get up here nowadays. It's great to see everybody this morning. I see some faces I haven't seen in a while. I see some faces I haven't seen before, and I look forward to getting to talk to all of you later on. COVID's had far-reaching effects. You know, if I'd have told you at the beginning of this year that, you'd have to spend some time, working from home and being with the family more, you'd be like, oh, that'd be great. There's some movies coming out later this year I really want to see. But the movie theaters are either heavily restricted or full on shut down, and because of that, movie production has come to a standstill. So some of those movies that we were all looking forward to seeing, well, that's not going to happen, at least not soon. But because of that, because of the restrictions, we all like entertainment, so the drive-in movie theaters have popped back up and become very popular. But with the one caveat that you're not getting to see new movies. You're now paying $20 to see a movie you probably have a VHS for at the moment. So, it's kind of it is what it is, right? Earlier this year, as I was researching some of my sermons, I was preaching on faith, hope, and love, and I came across this trailer for a movie called Faith, Hope, and Love. I'm like, oh, that looks good. And I told Alyssa, I got a movie for us to see tonight. We'll have a date night in. And we got about 10 minutes in, and we're like, yeah, I'm not sure this is going to work out. And I think 20 minutes in, we just shut it off. And part of that is because we can be a bit of critics when it comes to especially Christian movies. They can get pretty cheesy. So I'm not recommending this one, but I'm not bringing this up to get on a soapbox. There's one that we really like, which is called The Song. The Song is a Christian movie, which we like, that's based on the life of Solomon, based out of the Song of Songs. I got some of your attention. Some of you woke up there. The wordplay is interesting. So instead of using Solomon's name, they used Jed for Jedediah, which is the name that the priest or the prophet gave for Solomon. It uses Sharon as the town that he goes to because he's an aspiring musician. He's trying to follow in the footsteps of his dad, who's a big-time musician and performer. His last name is King. And he meets this woman called Rose, and they fall in love. And if you know the story of Solomon from Song of Songs and just his life in general, you know that things didn't necessarily work out so well. So it covers his fall. It covers the jerk that he becomes, and then his restoration. And what I really like about the song is that at the end of the movie, it's not that completely clean cut, everything is forgiven, everything is well. At the end, though there's reconciliation, you can still feel the pain. You can still feel the hurt. You know there's going to be a long road to acceptance and forgiveness and recovery. And this morning, we're going to look at a very similar type story, a story that is not clean, is not simple, it has a lot of complexity to it. In the month of July, we began by asking the question, how do we follow God? How do we know what God is asking of our life? And as much as we might want God to give us a prophecy of what each day over the next 2 years is going to look like and spell out for us what the future holds, that's not the way God operates. Instead, He gives us principles and ways that He wants us to live. Right? So we then ask the question of the text, what are some principles that God wants us to live by? And we began to look at Micah chapter 6 and verse 8, seek justice, love mercy, walk humbly with our God. And that was a challenging study. That was, I hope, a beneficial study as we look at what is God really asking of us. Well, now that we've spent 3 weeks going over seeking justice, loving mercy, and walking humbly with your God, I thought where better to go than the minor prophets because we're already there. The minor prophets in Jesus' day would have been known as the book of the 12. There's 12 minor prophets. And they're not minor because they're less important. They're minor because they're smaller. They were compiled into this one book known as the book of the 12. So there's a lot in this book. There's a lot to study in these minor prophets. And I hope that this is a blessing to you as we go through this study. I think the first time I ever really looked at the minor prophets, or at least the first time I remember reading the minor prophets, I was in upstate New York working as an apprentice for a church. And it was the first time in my life that I was really having to come face to face with some of the messiness of life, the seeing people not follow God the way that I thought they should, and reaching out to people on a consistent basis. And there was a lot of encouragement for me in the minor prophets because I saw that the world hasn't changed that much. There's always been rebellion against God. There's always been hurt in this world, and God is still at work. So I'm hoping that as we go through this study, not only will we continue to find those principles that God is giving us to live by, but I hope we'll also find encouragement during these difficult times. Now, I want to give a plug real quick to our Wednesday night Bible classes again. Jim has done a great job of teaching us and has adapted this format for us very well, I think, over the past couple of months. But he's ready for a break, and because of that, since there was nobody at this last Wednesday night's meeting going, hey, I'll do that, I raised my hand and I said, well, we can discuss the minor prophets following the sermon on Wednesday nights until somebody else is like, I can't stand Michael anymore, I'll teach. So what we're going to do is I'm going to encourage you to read through the minor prophets with us. We'll talk about it on Sunday, and then that following Wednesday, you can tell me all the things I got wrong from your own study and bring up all sorts of questions. So if you're interested in joining that class and being a part of that, let me know. I believe, I forgot to do the research again, but I saw a thing that looked like you could call in as well. So if you don't want to use internet, I think you can even just call in, and we can't see your pretty face, but we can hear your voice, or you can at least listen in to that discussion. So if you're interested in that, let me know. There's lots of ways to study the minor prophets. The way that the commentary that I got at Sunset was laid out was chronological, or at least what they believed to be chronological order. There's a couple books that we're not 100% sure when they were written. But when I was looking at it and thinking through it and doing some research, what I came to was the fact that these 12 prophets were compiled sometime after the return from Babylon led me to think there's probably a message from the compiler of these prophets to us. So my hope is by going in the order in which they're found in our Bibles, we will discover that message to his day, as well as discovering the message of each individual book. My goal is not to do an in-depth study. My goal is to give us an overview of what each book is talking about and then look at a passage or two that kind of highlights what he's talking about and what we need to do with it. That's my goal. The best laid plans of mice and men, right? So we'll see how that all goes. So what about Hosea? Hosea is the first book in the minor prophets, and I think it's appropriate, and I think we'll see that as we go through this. Hosea is a story that I think some of us know at least the first 3 chapters, but we really don't know anything after that. And that's really okay, because the first 3 chapters really set the tone for what is to come. Hosea, his name means salvation. And if you put Jehovah saves, you get Joshua. What's interesting about that is if you translate Joshua into Greek, you get Jesus. Now, why do I bring that up? Because Hosea is going to play a type of God in this story. He's going to give us a living illustration of what's going on in the nation. And in a way, we could actually say Hosea is playing Christ. He's the Christ figure in this story. And I find that to be interesting as we look at this. When we think of prophecy, when we think the minor prophets, we normally think of telling the future, right? We want to know what the future holds. That whole thing of, tell me what the future looks like over the next 2 years. I want to know what we are in for. But often God doesn't do that. In fact, these massive visions that we have in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel are kind of rare. For the most part, the prophet's work was to proclaim the message of God, to proclaim the judgment of God to the nations, to the king, to the people, and at times even to be an object lesson to the people. And we see that at times in Ezekiel's life as he plays with a toy city and burns feces in order to cook his meals. He's doing this living illustration, right? Hosea prophesied for about 50 years and is believed to also be a Levite, though I find that evidence to be kind of lacking personally. So there's some things you can go and do some research on. I think as we get into the book of Hosea, we'll see why we don't want to know the future. Let's read here Hosea chapter 1, starting in verse 2. The word of the Lord, first spoken through Hosea. The Lord said to Hosea, "Go and take for yourself a wife of whoredom, have children of whoredom, for the land has committed such great whoredom by forsaking the Lord." So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Hosea is one of those books that is just not clean, trim, and proper. And I think we see very early on why we don't want to know the future. We all face challenges in our life. We're facing challenges right now. And to have an unfaithful spouse is a great challenge in one's life. But at the beginning of one's relationship, to be told that the wife that you marry will be unfaithful, that you will have children by that unfaithfulness, is a looming cloud that I don't think any of us want hanging over our head. And that's exactly what Hosea had to do. He was told at the beginning of his ministry, I want you to go and take a wife of the people, a wife of the age, in the same way that the people are of the age. So he does. He goes and does this. Now, there's some who believe that he married a prostitute at the beginning of their marriage, that she was already in the work, and then he bought her. He invited her to be his spouse, and then she went back. That's possible. But the way that the phrase is used there in the beginning puts both the children and her state in the same context, and we know those to be future. The children haven't been born yet. So I would say that they began, because it's a typology of God and of Israel, that they began their life like anyone else. A loving relationship, maybe a medium to long courtship, began with great hope and expectations of a long life together. And he continued to preach the gospel. He continued to proclaim the message of God to his people. And eventually they had their first son. And it specifically says that she bore him Jezreel. The name Jezreel means to sow. And the implication is that God will sow judgment. That's the message that is being communicated through his name. But Jezreel is also a location. It's like introducing my child. Oh, this is Pearl Harbor. Right? Jezreel is a location. But also, if you change the accents around, it's Israel. So there's a huge play on words that is going in here. God's really hitting it on the nose here. This is Jezreel. I will sow judgment at Jezreel, on Israel. Right? All of these name plays are in play in this young man's name. How would you like to be a member of his family? Yeah, this is Jezreel. God will judge Israel at Jezreel. I mean, that's the imagery that's going on every time his name is said. Every time his name is proclaimed. Then they have a daughter. The daughter's name is Lo-Ruhamah. Lo-Ruhamah. No mercy. God says, because I will no longer have mercy upon my people. Some have looked at the text and said, it doesn't say, and she bore him a daughter. It says she bore a daughter, wondering whether or not the unfaithfulness has already begun. Maybe Hosea was a little bit frustrated. I will no longer have mercy on the way that you have abandoned our marriage. I will no longer put up with the way that you're unfaithful to me. As we look at chapter 2 and as kind of what's going on in the marriage seems to be fleshed out in the terminology of what God is saying to Israel, but seems to be what's actually happening at home, it's very possible that Hosea is putting up roadblocks, trying to keep her faithful, keep her home, but she keeps going out. God says, I will no longer have mercy upon my people. But he makes a distinction here. He says, I will have mercy upon Judah, but I will not do my mercy. I will not extend my mercy by giving them military victory. I will fight their battles for them in such a way where they are never able to say it was because of our strategy, because of our strength, because of our military might. God will not give them that. Then we hear the next name. Another son is born, and this time definitely not Hosea's. His name is Lo-Ammon. He is not my people. And that's exactly the implication. That's not my boy. He's not of me. And the implication being to the people is, you live in the land of Canaan, and you may be descendants of Abraham, but you're Canaanites in every respect. That's who you are. You are the Canaanites. That you have become the people that you drove out of the land. That's who you are. That's who you become. And God says, I will not call you my people. You're not my people anymore. But listen to the words of Hosea and to God as he deals with his children. At the end of Hosea chapter 2, starting in verse 21, and in that day I will answer, declares the Lord. I will answer the heavens, and they shall answer the earth. And the earth shall answer the grain, the wine, and the oil. And they shall answer to Jezreel, will sow her for myself in the land. And I will have mercy on no mercy. And I will say to not my people, you are my people. And he shall say, you are my God. Can you feel the tension that has to be going on at home in Hosea's life? As his wife has gone out and is being unfaithful to him. And as he has these young kids at home, two of which are suspect, one of which seems to be very well confirmed, not to be my kids. And maybe he was frustrated at the beginning. I will not have mercy upon Gomer. I will not consider you my children. But as he was dealing with his kids, and in the same way I think God, as he's dealing with his kids, he's like, but I have to have mercy upon you. I have to love you. I have to have compassion upon you. You will be my people again. We see this proclaimed of what will be. That he will sow them in the land, that he will sow amongst them goodness, blessing, that he will have mercy and compassion upon his people. But Gomer is out partying. Gomer is out living the life of the people. She has found herself lovers. It's possible she has got herself caught up in the cult of Baal and Asherah worship. She has found herself lovers, and she has gone after them, taking the gifts, the benefits of the home life that Hosea has provided to her, and she has taken them to her lovers as gifts to buy their love, sacrificing to the Baals and the Asherahs, using the prophets of the prophet of God to worship idols, abandoning her lover. Can you imagine what the people must have said to Hosea? You're a righteous man, and yet your wife is running around on you. Why do you put up with it? Why do you love her? Why do you go about the streets looking for her, seeking her out? Why don't you divorce her already? And if you're such a holy man and a man of the book, why don't you divorce her or stone her? And Hosea turns around and says, I'm glad you asked. Because she's acting like Israel is acting. She's acting like the people are acting. They have abandoned their God. They have gone after the idols. They've gone after the nations around them for protection, for security. In the same way that my wife is cheating on me, you're cheating on God. And God will use that same graphic detail, that same graphic imagery again and again and again throughout the prophets to say, this is what your idolatry is to me. You want to worship me, and at the same time you want to worship Baal. The two don't mix. You can't do that. You have to choose who you will follow. In the end, Gomer ends up a slave. She ends up sold on the auction block. Talk about hitting rock bottom. Not only do your lovers not love you anymore, but you're up for sale. Not only will we not give you gifts, but we want payment for what we've given you, and we're going to sell you to get it. But listen to what God calls Hosea to say and do. Hosea chapter 3, starting in verse 2, So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver, and a homer and a length of barley, and said to her, You must dwell with me for many days, and you shall not play the whore, or belong to another man. So will I also be to you. For the children of Israel shall dwell many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or house of gods. Afterwards the children of Israel shall return, they shall seek the Lord their God, and David their king, and they shall come in from afar, and the Lord and his goodness in the latter days. God called Hosea to go out and buy back his wife. Can you imagine walking up to the slave market, seeing your wife up there, and having to buy her back to redeem her? A woman who was unfaithful to you, who ran out on you and your family. He pays full price. It seems that half was paid in silver and half in barley, indicating that he didn't have it. He only had half. So he had to pay with their food. He bought her back with everything that he had. Approximately 6 months' wages for an unskilled labor worker. If we consider that minimum wage and we do the math, that's about $13,000. I don't know about you, but I don't have that sitting in my bank account. It's a high price. And I think in that moment, as he bought her back, as he paid and he embraced her, I think she got it. I think it broke her heart. I think she got what he had been proclaiming all these years. She didn't deserve it. She knew it. She wasn't worthy of his love and affection, and she knew it. And then to hear him proclaim, you will come home and live with me. We will once again be a family. You're no longer going to do these things. Look what they brought you. And in the same way that we will be a family again, so too Israel will be a family again. We will be brought back to this land. God will redeem us. And we have this wonderful picture, and anybody paying attention to this whole saga at the market that day hopefully got it too. Hopefully understood what Hosea was living out before them, a living example of who God was to his people and what his people had been doing to God. I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we avoid the pitfall of Gomer, of Israel, of Judah? How do we avoid such scandal in the way that we treat our God? Look over at Hosea chapter 4 and verse 6. Hosea says, "My people are destroyed because of a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected the knowledge, I reject you from being priest to me. And since you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children." There's a lot in there. There's a lot in there. And as we look at this aspect of knowledge, one of the things we need to understand is it's not simply talking about book knowledge. It's not just knowing the words on this page and getting them into my brain. That's not what this word knowledge communicates, though that's part of it. It's an intimate knowledge, an experiential knowledge of experiencing and knowing somebody face to face, living life with them. God says, "You're destroyed, O Israel." Not just because you don't know my book, but because you don't know me. You haven't lived life with me. You haven't been beside me. You haven't followed me. And as a result, you're destroyed because you've run off after the people of the land, after the nations around you for protection, thinking that you can create enough alliances to keep you safe. You think that you can worship the Baals and the Asherahs enough to keep your house intact, but what it's doing is destroying you. It's leading you to a place where you become the slave, where you're at the end. You're destroyed. And this concept of knowledge is carried through several times in the scriptures of Hosea. Look over at chapter 6, starting in verse 4. "What shall I do to you, O Ephraim? What shall I do with you, O Judah? Your love is like a morning cloud, like a dew that is early gone. Therefore I have hewn them by the prophets, and have slain them by the word of my mouth, and my judgment goes forth as the light. For I desire steadfast love, not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." God says, I don't just want you to come and sacrifice to me. Later on in the prophets, he'll say, I don't want you just to rend your garments. I don't want you to come and mourn in such a way that it's just outward expression. I want your love. I want your knowledge. Once again, it's not this book knowledge. It's an experiential knowledge. I want you to know me. I want you to follow me. I want you to get me. That's what God is saying. God, through a redemptive love, will buy back His people, bring His people back, long-suffering with them. And that's what we see in the book of Hosea. Again and again, we see God's long-suffering. God coming alongside the people and saying, know me, follow me. Don't you see what you're doing to yourself and to me? You're running around, you're looking to these empty wells and you're not filled. And that's exactly the message that is needed to start off a study of the minor prophets. Because the prophets will come to Israel again and again and again and try to proclaim to them not only their sin, but what they need to do in repentance and who God is. And ultimately, as graphic and unsettling as the book of Hosea is, it's a perfect portrayal of what the message of the minor prophets is all about a God who's faithful, loving, compassionate, long-suffering to a people who are stiff-necked and rebellious, who go after their own ways. So the question we have to ask ourselves then is, do we know Him? Do we know our God? Are we following Him? Are we seeking Him? The Word of God says that if we will seek Him, we will find Him. If we knock, the door will be answered. God longs to reveal Himself to us, to be known by us. He's not playing hard to get. He's not hiding from us. He's just standing, waiting for us to say, I need you. So the question is, will we seek Him? Will we desire Him? Will we seek Him out? Or will we go after the empty wells of this world? Will we put our trust in the things of this world, or will we put our trust in our God, who is more than able to save, who has redeemed us at a high price? And if you need help this morning coming to know our God, if you need the prayers of the congregations, then we want you to let those needs be known as we stand and sing. But let us this week pursue our God.